This week, none other than Dave the Shackleford will join us from the SANS Institute and Voodoo Security. We have a technical segment based on a blog post I made that has been getting much traction called I Made the Switch to a Linux laptop. I'll talk about the differences between having an Apple laptop and using a Linux laptop from System 76. In our stories of the week in the security news, toys that spy on you, ransomware, someone lost a petabyte of data. Hackers get rehab, not sure how that works, automating security, and, well, Yahoo. All that and more on this edition of Paul Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Brought to you by the SANS Institute, the most trusted source for computer certification training and research. Visit sans.org to explore their full curriculum and latest training offers. Onapsis, the leading provider of solutions to protect ERP systems from cyber attacks. Customers can secure their SAP and Oracle business critical platforms from espionage, sabotage, and financial fraud risks. Visit them on the web at onapsis.com. Pony Express. Check out their line of penetration testing devices, including the Pwn Pad, the Pwn Phone, and the Pwn Pro. For enterprises, there's Pwn Pulse, providing continuous visibility into wired, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth spectrums across all physical locations, including remote sites and branch offices. For all those hard-to-reach places, there's Pony Express. Visit them on the web at ponyexpress.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to Paul Security Weekly, episode 493. It's December 15th. I'm here in the studio with none other than the man, the plan, the canal, Paul Asadorian.
Welcome everyone to Paul's Security Weekly. Merry Christmas, you filthy animals. I even got the shirt to prove it. I always wear ridiculous. They were everyone in the studio was like, we should have like an ugly sweater day in the office. I'm like, I've been wearing ugly sweaters for like weeks now. Yeah.
And I don't actually own any. Well, at least not Christmas oriented.
Good for you. Mr. Jeff Mann, of course, is here with us. Crypt analyst, InfoSec analyst, pioneering ex-NSA pen tester, PCI specialist, and certified security curmudgeon. Welcome, Jeff.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Paul.
Nice to have you in studio.
In studio, probably for the last time in 2016.
And like all other 8 people couldn't make it tonight.
Yeah, it's just us. We should have fun tonight.
We should. I was hoping Carlos would be here tonight. Did anyone get a hold of Carlos? Can we try Skyping Carlos, messaging Carlos?
If you're not careful, we're going to have a civics discussion during the news segment.
Got to be careful about that.
That's right.
So securityweekly.com/subscribe. Subscribe to all of our shows, including Hack Naked News, Enterprise Security Weekly, and Startup Security Weekly. I'd say there's actually 3 other shows other than this one, all with their own flair and character and personality. So make sure you check those out, securityweekly.com/subscribe.
Does each of the other podcasts have 17 pieces of flair?
Maybe not 17.
Okay, we need to work on that.
Some may have 13, maybe 18. So, yeah, we'll balance it out.
Remember, 17 pieces of flair.
That's right. Take our super cool survey, securityweekly.com/survey. Thank you to everyone who filled out the survey. We'll probably be closing it out pretty soon as I collected a lot of great data to build awesome podcasts from now and into the future.
That has been a lot of great data. Very informative, very instructional.
I like it.
And the one resounding thing was, let's have more women involved in the program. And I think
I heard that.
You have an announcement.
I do. Well,
we
hired Sam, who's a woman.
Sam's a woman.
Yes, is the operations manager now here at Security Weekly.
And she's awesome. She's been here
started
a day,
today.
and she's turned
Well, she
the
worked
place
for us
around.
part-time before. It's a long story, but
there's
we stole her.
organization, and
we stole her.
there's definitely, I don't want to say a woman's touch. That sounds sexist, but there's definitely
very sexist,
there's definitely order to the program now that didn't exist.
I am
before.
more about chaos than order.
That's right.
Yes, Mark and Riley are our production staff. We thank them. They have come a long way this year with the production. They'll be with us full time moving into 2017. So we've got a lot of awesome sponsors that'll be joining us. I don't have the complete list in front of me, but you'll notice many of the same faces and some new faces.
Any new ones you can think of to advertise?
New ones. I know definitely on Enterprise Security Weekly, one that I'm excited about is Waterfall Security. It's kind of a funny story. I met their CEO and founder years ago at a SANS ICS conference, and he stuck with me. And they're like, "Yeah, Waterfall." They signed up, and I was like, "I want to interview Lior, that guy I met," and so he's going to come on the show
Very cool.
he may actually come in studio for Enterprise Security Weekly.
Very cool.
So that's one that sticks out in my mind because I'm very excited because he was awesome. So
Excellent.
And Carlos is on.
Hey,
Thank
we
you,
got
Carlos.
Hey.
How's it going, Carlos? Welcome, Carlos Perez, to the program.
Doing good.
Carlos has some feedback on I made the switch to a Linux laptop. So that'll be coming up after our interview. Go ahead, Carlos. What are you going to say?
Mostly to your arguments on you had a list of 6 arguments of why not the MacBook.
Yes.
And 2 of them I didn't agree, and the others I did.
Well, stay tuned to the next segment. We'll find out where Carlos doesn't agree with me, which I'm sure he's probably right anyway. Mr. Dave Shackleford is here with us. Dave, welcome back to the program. Dave's, of course, no stranger to Security Weekly. You've been here several times, Dave.
Yeah, a few times. Thanks for having me.
Dave and I have a long history together that we love to joke about all the time.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
It's a long history, but you only remember portions of it.
That's right. That's right. I remember sushi hitting me in the face. It's fun.
I think I hit you in the chest. It was the chest.
It was. Well, it gets more elaborate every time I tell the story.
No, yeah, it was right in the face.
Right in the. It was stuck right over my eye. I lost my vision for a week. It was fine. Yeah.
There were goats. Yeah, it was great.
So, Dave, where did you want to start? We talked about a couple different topics that we would discuss. Did you want to start maybe with cloud security? I know you.
Yeah.
I think you started with a class on virtualization, and you were kind of on the forefront of that, and then very quickly, I think, moved into cloud, and so that's like one of your classes at SANS now?
Yeah, so actually, the virtualization class is now more focused on sort of virtualization plus converged sort of infrastructure internally, but we're developing a new class for next year that's going to be purely on public cloud. So it's in the works, in fact.
Awesome. I'm so excited to hear that, as I was actually on a previous show, a different show, on Enterprise Security Weekly, interviewing some folks from IT Pro. And I said, I one of the skills gaps that I see is not just doing security in the cloud, right, but building out cloud infrastructure. I feel like there's a huge skills gap there, just all around. I mean, whether you're building that for a security product, whether you're merging your IT infrastructure into the cloud, whether you're using software as a service or a hosted platform, I just feel like in general, there is a huge skills gap there. And we did a previous segment on this show, Dave, about, using Docker and Ansible and containers and orchestration and like everyone's head spin. I just feel like overall, as a community in IT and in security, we're behind the curve on this cloud thing. Is that probably your take, since you're developing a class? Probably your take too, right?
Yeah, it's true, and really it all comes down. I mean, you mentioned all the classic buzzwords. It's the idea of security as code, and no security people feel comfortable managing security as code. We've got to get to a point where we can define our entire set of security parameters in a definitions file and automate it and have it pushed out along with the dev teams and not kind of get in the way of things. And that is a massive shift from where we've been. And so it's taking a lot of people some time to get there.
Do you think so? In that light, Dave, is security more kind of like baked into this new process of containerization and micro virtualization? Or I'm going to use more buzzwords just for you.
I love it.
Microservices,
do it.
don't forget those.
Microservices. Thank you, Carlos.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you do everything perfectly from the minute you start until, whenever you deploy it, yeah, of course, absolutely. It's going to be more secure. But the problem here, there's two problems, right? So you can be a lot more secure in the cloud in actually a lot of ways. But number one, the dev team is still their own worst enemy. And number two, the problems we face are really in those of, sort of getting around the cloud, the cloud providers themselves and trying to get the details we're used to having. And we don't have those. And so it's causing people to have this like massive, sort of discord where they feel like, we don't know what's going on. And so therefore we're insecure. But the reality is you might just be. So it's actually a huge problem, not only in the sense of building it, but also in getting that feedback loop. And that's where I think a lot of security professionals have a lot of trouble with it.
But
So you would say it's more around the processes of people getting used to that. Now you have a more agile process where, let's take, for example, containers. They appear, they disappear. You are creating them in a very fast way, but at the very beginning of that process, security is used to static servers or static VMs and not used to, let's say, how do I work with Chef? How do I work with Puppet? How do I hook into this stuff? Like before we deploy all of these containers, let's say on a Kubernetes.
I was waiting for it.
cluster.
Kubernetes, we hit that one.
Kubernetes.
We're experts on
You need
that
to
now.
check all of that stuff before it actually gets deployed, or when it gets deployed, you have another service that, let's say, if they're web servers, triggers web scans of all of those microservices or all of those instances. Like, there is a shift in how do you think about the infrastructure, how it gets deployed, how it gets maintained, and its fluidity, I would say.
I think that's fair. And actually, so I love that you brought up Kubernetes. That's great. But here's the problem. So, I mean, everybody's familiar with the term sort of continuous monitoring. And most security professionals will tell you they think it's BS. Like, we don't have continuous monitoring. That's something we made up to sort of, sell something. If you don't have continuous monitoring, you do not have good cloud security, because it's all about the feedback loop. And you have to get away from the idea that, this is my server and I love it and it's my Unix box and I've like pampered this thing for a week or a year or however long. You should be comfortable building a box, setting it up, and tearing it completely down 12 hours later and putting a new one in its place. And that is radically different than we've been used to in security. It's just a huge shift.
And not only that, but the tool set. I talk with many security people, and I talk with them about Chef, Puppet, PowerShell DSC, and all of that kind of tooling, where you're defining a set of configurations that go to a specific number of hosts, VMs, microservices, containers, however you call it, and you manage that configuration that way on a constant basis. And they're going like, no, that's for developers. We don't need to get into that DevOps stuff. And they're like, no. If you don't get inside of that loop, you're not being useful. Now you're just delaying or just being a hindrance to the entire process.
So can we have a rant here? Can we have like a minor rant?
Let's do
rant?
it. Go for it.
Okay.
I know I can do one.
Right. No. So of course we can. How many security people that you know, and this is being honest, how many security people that you know jive with developers and know code? Like, get the development process and understand it and actually know what the hell's going on there. Most do not.
Mm-hmm. Very few, and it's a fight, and it's a fight that I've had for a long time with many. When I say that, if you want to be good at security, you need to know how to script, you need to know how to code, you need to know how to automate. At the very least, as a basic skill. And many times when I tweet that, I'm surprised at how much backslash I get from people like, no. You can be a good pen tester, you can be a good incident responder without knowing how to script or knowing how to code. I'm going like, no, that's basics. That's fucking basics.
Nah.
Well, the other thing too is not just knowing how to code, but somewhat more to Dave's point too is understanding the development process is almost a separate skill set from actually knowing like how to code. Like understanding the whole process of developing requirements, documentation, writing some code, unit testing, going to QA, going to production, rinsing, repeating.
I understand there's very little documentation in the development process.
But understanding that process is important.
That's why I love the novel, The Phoenix Project. I remember reading that book and having flashbacks and sweaty hands like, shit, I've been there. Or many times I've gone like, I'm going through that same problem right now. And when they put the case of the security guy had a bunch of binders. He was always complaining about, we need to be compliant. Developers were just giving him the elbow, like, here comes security again. Here comes this guy to another meeting about how we're not compliant or how we're not securing stuff and security breaking stuff. And at the very end, you see how security actually learned how to fit into that kind of new paradigm on how infrastructure is being managed, all of this DevOps kind of mantra.
Well, I definitely think security, when done right, needs to be able to adapt to the business environment, to the business demands, whatever it is, whether it's cloud or whatever. And that's one of the keys. And it touches on process, like you mentioned, Carlos. Understanding, the cards you're dealt with, the parameters, the complexities, the realities of what's there, and security, if done right, shouldn't be leading or be the impediment. It should be figuring out how to make security work within the parameters that you're given within the environment, within the business operation.
Yeah. So Dave, how does security change? For example, today when I'm in security, right? Someone comes to the security team and is like, hey, we're going to build this new web application. A part of our concern in security is, okay, well, where are you going to host that and who's going to maintain the operating system? And then what are you going to use for a web server and what's the standard build for that and what security is going to be applied? And then who's going to host the application server? What's it going to be? How are we going to apply security to that? And you're working with multiple teams. And then there's the security of the actual application. I feel like in today's world and largely in tomorrow's world, they may not even come to you and they're just going to go take their app and drop it in AWS Lambda, which cuts out the security of those bottom three layers entirely from your view. So what is security do we do about that?
Yeah. You just got to let it go, Paul. I think you're too tense right now, buddy.
Just like the song, let it go.
Well, let me simplify the question. You started by saying doing it in the cloud in a lot of ways makes you more secure. Can you expand on that? Why? How?
So this has to start with a premise. And that premise, I think, is borne out with the news every day that most organizations inherently they suck at security. Mm-hmm. And the idea that we're going to somehow just take this leap and have a hockey stick curve of getting better at security, I think we got to just stop. Come on. It's not going to happen. You're not going to get enough budget, and you're not going to get enough time, and you're not going to get enough people to do perfect security the way that you envision it and the way that, the classic cheesy defense in depth models tell you're supposed to do it. And so you're going to be relegated to a position where, you're doing sort of half security and you're defending it vigorously because it's your thing. Get over that. You're going to lose. Cloud it's done. Like that's a done deal. You lost the war. People are going to cloud and you better figure out how to get there. And it's just going to keep going. And so what you got to look at is what the cloud providers have and how you can leverage that. I'll give the example of Lambda. Lambda is like the worst example because it's like, hey, here's this template for how everything should be, and it's a crappy template, and there's like no visibility, and it's not great. But
that's why I gave you that example, Dave.
I know, there was no softball in that approach, right? But that's like the amateur hour of cloud deployment. I mean, most enterprises have at least a clue, but this works both ways, right? So the really experienced DevOps teams, they still do stupid things. They embed keys and credentials in code. Mm-hmm. They push stuff out of band. I mean, like they do things that are dumb, But the problem is they don't trust the security team to have a clue what they're up to and what they're trying to accomplish either. And most of the time they're right. And so, we do have a skills gap, and we do have a problem with people that get what's going on. And until we get to the point where they sort of meet in the middle, the dev team is going to get the okay from the CIO to keep pushing stuff. And the security team is going to keep looking at what they've had internally and going, well, wait, it doesn't look like this. And those are, that's a divergent way to look at things. The cloud is going to happen. I'm not going to say that every cloud environment is better and that every potential cloud deployment is better, but I firmly believe you could probably build a more secure infrastructure and application stack in the cloud if there was at least a better collaborative effort between the dev, ops, and security teams than you could internally, hands down.
But you have to take into consideration that securing a database and application server, for example, locally is going to be not more secure by default, but different in the cloud. Because certainly I can have my database hosted in Amazon and I lose some control, but how do I apply what security controls are there? A lot of us don't know. A lot of us need that skill to learn.
And you learn. And
we're going to have to learn.
That's the problem. That you need to learn, and people do not like change, do not like learning.
Well,
that is a sad statement.
Some people don't.
Do not like change.
Some people don't. But I think a lot of us are really bogged down with the daily tactical stuff, right? And can't just sit down and go, oh, you know what? I'm going to deploy a whole app in the cloud and see how I can secure it.
But it is part of your job. If you're in a security if you're part of an infrastructure and you're part of an organization, and that organization is shifting the way it works, you should, at the very least, have some visibility of those changes coming down the pipeline, even if it is weeks or months, and you have to then plan into your work schedule. Like, this is changing. I need this is going to come into my environment. I need to learn how it works. I need to learn how it operates. They're planning this stuff. I should be in those meetings ahead of time so I know what specifically they're discussing, what they're going to be doing, so I can then modify the way I'm going to work, or see if I need to modify it, or what do I need to learn to work in it.
I will caution you, though, if you are going to go build a lab in AWS, for example, understand the costs and the cost structure before you go do that, because you'll look at your credit card bill the next month and be like, what is that? Oh, my God. Do you have advice for people, Dave, on how they can do that without racking up like a huge, like, are there certain things you can look for?
Yeah, well, I mean, so the first thing is, if you just go sign up for AWS initially, you can do a lot of the stuff to just learn the basics in what they call their free tier. And you can, get yourself at least a provisional number of hours, et cetera, to just figure out things like CloudFormation scripting and spinning up server instances. You just can't keep them running. Yep. So if you try to run a kind of standalone stuff, set of stuff that stays there, it's going to start costing you. But you can go spin things up, spin them back down reasonably within a month or two, and probably have some luck in keeping your costs low. Other than that, the only thing I could recommend is that you try to, not go for the gusto. I mean, sure, can you provision, large instances that sit on their own standalone servers? Yeah, but you're going to find that just that one instance is going to cost you like $1,000 in a month. And it gets, to your point, it gets crazy. So run small instances, run the tiny little AMIs from Amazon just to sort of see what they are, spin up things like identity management. I mean, you can do it pretty reasonably.
Nice.
So I think it's a true statement that the allure of the cloud is that it's cheaper, right? And then hypothetically, of course, there's all these hidden charges that, like, Paul
they're not necessarily not necessarily
hidden.
They're hidden. They're confusing to understand and understand all of the impacts,
the ramifications.
Yeah, the ramifications of your choices. Yes.
It looks
again. We go back to knowledge.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Well, and I'll tell you. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, a lot of what you described, Dave, is the problem. I think has been there since the beginning. What you're describing is not new in terms of the problems, the disconnects, the lack of trust, the lack of cooperation between the various teams. What about the cloud makes it different, or has the potential for being different?
I'll tell you. It's interesting you ask that. We do a survey every year at SANS. on cloud security, and we sort of ask these questions. Hey, what's driving this in your organization? And in the beginning, you're exactly right. It was cost, or the perception of cost savings.
Right.
We're going to save money going to the cloud. And frankly, that's just not true. It turns out the cloud's actually pretty expensive. But CIOs are starting to figure this out, and even security teams are figuring this out. And now what is driving cloud is two things, and people are acknowledging it. It's scale and it's features. So do you have a WAF? I mean, who cares? It doesn't matter. Maybe you need it for a checkbox. Maybe you want one. Doesn't matter. But do I want to go buy an Imperva box and put it in place and care and feed for it and not feed it after midnight or whatever? Or do I want to go spin something up in a software-defined version in Amazon as part of my service and pay a nominal fee every month to have it protect me? I've got DDoS protection in Amazon now. They just announced that at reInvent. Like, they're adding features faster, far faster, even on the security side, than you're going to be able to do in-house. I mean, there's no question about this. You're not going to be able to spin up an infrastructure like they've built around your environment, despite the fact that you may not have as much control over it or see it blinking in a rack. But the big thing is scale. I don't have to build an infrastructure hoping and thinking that I might hit a threshold. I can spin up just enough to get me by with auto scaling to get me where I need to be if more data or business or whatever comes in. And that is huge for a CIO whose yearly bonus is largely based on sort of building things that are beating out their competitors or sort of getting rid of capital expenditures. It's 100% a go for putting things out in the cloud, and that's going to continue.
And there's some great companies, too, that once you get to that point, Dave, where you've got a lot of your infrastructure in the cloud and you're auto-scaling, there are companies that can help you manage, monitor, and maintain that so that you don't go over a certain cost or understand where your costs are, too. I've seen a lot of those companies spin up and grow that are essentially their sole goal in life is to help you manage your costs and infrastructure in the cloud.
Well, I wondered, too, I mean, we're talking about the cost, and, the allure initially was that it's cheaper, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't, maybe it's not. But do CIOs and do companies really take into account all the costs associated with housing their own infrastructure in terms of personnel, training, maintenance, even the electric bill, frankly, or even leasing the space of the data center. The data center that used to be in the headquarters, could be repurposed or it could just be given away, and sold. I mean, do they really take into account all the costs? And I would tend to think that, maybe it is cheaper in the cloud when you take into account all the different costs associated with hosting and housing and maintaining your own systems.
I don't know. I think it depends. Certainly storage is an area where we could have an interesting discussion because storage in the cloud I find to be
that's one of the costly parts.
It can get really expensive in the cloud where you can have it locally more easily. But if you're collecting a bunch of data in the cloud, you got to get it out of the cloud and onto your storage, and there's a charge for that.
well, it depends because when we're working about enterprise storage, we're talking about enterprise arrays where you have multiple. You have probably redundant controllers. You're going to have one array replicating to another, so you have redundancy. We're talking about SAS drives, or nowadays we're talking about solid state. So we have to make sure that when we talk about storage and the cost of storage, that we're also taking into account the reliability of that storage.
Yes.
Because when we start talking about reliable storage, it gets very expensive very fast, locally.
And I think actually Carlos has a good point too. Talk about things like DR and continuity strategies. Likely, maybe behind change management, one of the most boring topics in all of IT, but nonetheless one that is costly and painful, and you got to have. Man, I can do business continuity in the cloud dramatically better and easier than I can trying to maintain like a dual primary site or have a warm standby. Like, all those classic models suck if I'm trying to implement them in physical data centers. If I have a CloudFormation template for my entire infrastructure, at least for critical apps, I can recreate my environment with a couple clicks and do so in numerous different regions and have it sort of, there's so many benefits on that front that it almost starts to make sense alone. But The reality is...
Yeah, but I'll play devil's advocate. Well, then I have to trust the cloud providers, if they're encrypting my storage, that they're actually doing it properly and not messing that up somewhere.
Well, how many of them are providing encryption as one of their features or capabilities?
Almost all of them right now, at least the big ones. Azure is providing it, and it actually gives you control of your own keys and also of the solution that is encrypting it. You can go to their store and actually buy from their store a solution from a third party on how do you want to encrypt it, and you manage those keys, or you can let Microsoft manage those keys for you. Same thing for AWS. You can control how do you encrypt that data. And how do you manage those keys if you want to maintain that control of those keys, or you want to give control over to Amazon of those keys to encrypt that data?
Included, or is that
that is extra? That is something that you buy. Yeah. That is an add-on, just like with any other vendor. It is that you want this feature. This is feature not all of our customers want it. So if you want it, it means that we have to go through some extra work, some extra validation.
So I can give you a great price on a car. Oh, you want it to have doors?
But there's still
a steering wheel?
So I'll continue to try and play devil's advocate
Keep
for
going.
the benefit of our audience. What about the security of the hypervisor? If I can get into that level, can I maybe somehow bypass that encryption or somehow break the security and get into someone else's cloud? Right. That's the other argument that people.
And that is a very interesting one, specifically when we talk about, let's say, Amazon. Amazon, when there's a vulnerability that appears in KVM, you see that many times Amazon may make you have to reboot your VPSs because they had to apply certain patches. In the case of Microsoft, it is very close source branch of Windows and their own hypervisor. It is not the typical Hyper-V that you run in your environment, and it's not even your typical Windows that you run in your environment. So it all depends on what they use for their infrastructure, and I think that will vary from vendor to vendor, and one has to look at their history there on what has been found via researchers.
And I'll chime in on that, obviously, doing a lot of work in virtualization. I mean, Carlos has a good point. The thing you have to ask yourself, and it's one of those awkward questions in security, is, do you think you're doing a better job of managing hypervisor security than they are? That's their business. That's the lowest level of the stack that facilitates the operation of a multi-tenant environment. Most people suck at keeping their patches up to date in VMware environments or in whatever type of hypervisor infrastructure they're running because they're terrified of breaking something. Those guys have built from the ground up an environment where they're prepared to keep that thing as patched as possible. I think those guys get the edge on this one, big time.
So let me push back on that a little bit. In general, the notion of outsourcing to a third party, prior to the cloud in the old days, just hosting providers, any kind of outsourced third-party IT function, the presumption has always been, as you described, well, that's what they do for a living. Certainly they do it better. They've got to have the leg up. But in my experience as a consultant over the years, when I would do business or have to interact with those third parties and hosting providers, very often once you get past that initial front facade, they were very often just as bad as everybody else. So what's different today?
I mean, I can't believe you're disparaging cloud providers right now, Jeff. I mean,
that's our job right now. That's our job right now.
That is my job title.
That's the stance that we're taking.
It's like you don't believe, and I'm just going to take the opposite stance. I love those cloud providers, and I want them to succeed. So I think there's probably a happy meet in the middle point.
I think when you say that, your hands should be up like this.
Like what? Like...
Not like jazz hands.
Not jazz hands.
That was the universal symbol for distress.
The difference is huge. It's a huge difference. It's great.
Huge.
It's great.
Tiny
Security is great.
Tiny. These hands are tiny right now. So, the fact of the matter is, you're never going to know. That's what sucks about the cloud is that, they're going to tell you, guys, we are awesome. We're so good. Our security is huge. It's going to be the best security. And the problem is you don't know.
You don't know. And I'll flip it back on you. I think a lot of companies, the allure of the cloud be it cost or whatever, companies are going to the cloud probably because they don't have much of a security function to begin with, if any at all. Smaller companies, mid-sized companies, companies that, really benefit from the cost savings or the perceived cost savings. So, I'm getting a hint of, we're having a discussion with the assumption that there is a security staff, there is a security function within a company, and how do you extend that into the cloud? But for a lot of the companies that are maybe the early adopters, they don't have that function. They're really relying on the provider to provide that for them. And my advice would be just, if you don't have the function and you're expecting the cloud provider, just read the details, read the small print, find out exactly what they are and are not signing up for in terms of the security. And if it's an add-on feature, make sure you know that, and make sure you know that you need to sign up for that kind of stuff. Especially
and look at the history also
Yeah.
of the provider. Many will say we do this, and when you start doing a couple of Google searches, you'll find customers complaining like, I had this specific issue, and this is what they said, and this is what they were actually doing.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm gonna throw a controversial thought out here just for what it's worth. I mean, I'm very bullish on cloud. I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I mean, candidly, it's interesting being at CDI here for SANS and teaching in DC. I'm in DC, so imagine for a moment the kind of people I probably have in my class. Half of them work for agencies, right? I got people from DoD. I got a lot of agencies.
It doesn't say that on their badge. It just says a fictitious name on their badge.
Yeah, right. They make it up, right? Exactly. But they're all going to the cloud too. I mean, they're all going to the cloud for some stuff. Mm-hmm. But here's the rub. And again, here's my controversial position on this. I think it benefits all of us if one of the biggest cloud providers has a massive breach. I don't wish that. I don't wish it because I hate it when anybody has one. But these guys have basically got people coming up to them with wheelbarrows full of money, and they don't have to expose very much. They don't have to give us the details we've been asking for. They can stonewall us, and they can give us, no love in contracts and everything else. But all of a sudden, you get an Amazon breach or you get a Microsoft Azure breach that's massive. We've got a little more leverage in that case, and we need it. The biggest problem we have in the cloud is the fact that these guys don't give us enough detail about what's really going on, and something's got to be a tipping point to change that. And I hope it happens. I honestly do. I hope we see something that acts as a catalyst to get us to where the cloud providers go, you know what, we sort of have sucked for the last 7 years. We're going to give you a lot more detail about our environment, and sure, we're going to invite you to come for that on-site audit this time.
I don't see that as extremely controversial.
Here's another thing. I don't trust solutions providers that provide me solutions in the cloud. And it's not that I don't trust the cloud hosting providers like Amazon or Microsoft Azure. I don't trust the solutions provider that they're actually providing me a secure solution in the cloud. Maybe they've done something that will expose my data. So therefore, I want to purchase that solution and have it on premise. Is that a valid concern?
I think the assumption that we've been making in this discussion is that companies have a security staff, and a security professional, I think, would have the same sort of hunch that you have. The predisposition, they're not doing it right. And so then the question becomes, how do I make sure that they're doing it right? How do I find out what
that's
they're
the next
doing, what
logical
they're not
question.
doing?
How do I validate the solutions I'm getting in the cloud?
But,
bingo. And I think you also have to look at the fact that look, how many big, huge enterprises do you see that have the staff, have the budget, have every blinky widget you can imagine, and still suck? Mm-hmm. I think that is what we have to look at and go, is there a better way? And maybe there is. I don't know the cloud may be it. It may not be. It doesn't really matter because we're going to end up there to some degree anyway. But I think we have to get off the stance that doing it internally with our own people is always better, because I don't think we're really doing a good job there either.
Well, I think that's based on an assumption that some people make that, you don't really know what you know, and you don't really have that level of security or that level of feeling or impression of security unless you're doing it yourself. I don't trust anybody else. That's X-Files. Trust no one. Trust nothing. I can only trust myself. And the giving up that trust to somebody else is part of the nature of the business.
But what Dave's saying is he wants to believe that the cloud
I know he wants to believe, but his controversial statement is really just a reflection of the entire security industry, not just on the internet and networking, but throughout history. Big changes happen when something really bad happens, and then everybody's like, "Oh, that can happen. Let's fix it." I mean, but that's the track record for the last 25 years of this whole whatever we call this thing,
and
internet security.
Some things don't get fixed, like IoT, but
well, that's a whole different paradigm. That's another show. That's another topic.
It is indeed.
Which plays into the cloud as well. Most of the devices talk back to the cloud.
Indeed,
It's the cloud's fault.
So what can we do as consumers to get over the notion that I can do it better? How do I then vet my solutions providers in the cloud? Like, what questions should I be asking about their security that they're going to protect my data?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, probably the best starting point, and not to necessarily plug these guys, although I do have some involvement with them, it's the Cloud Security Alliance. They've got a great questionnaire called the Consensus Assessments Initiative that you can download for free, and it's a pretty solid list to start with. But what I always tell people to do is sort of line this up side by side with whatever your current vendor and supply chain questionnaires are, and adapt it to your own needs. But you have to give these guys a good, strong list of questions that speak specifically to your industry and your data types and your business requirements, and get answers from them. And if they're not willing to give you answers explicitly, that's probably not a good fit for you. I mean, that's really the starting point for most organizations, I'd say.
So a variation of that question, I think another allure to moving to the cloud is the belief, if not the reality, that liability shifts. Let's take PCI for instance. I had to bring it up somewhere along the line.
No, it's a good question.
But it's an important part. I had a customer a few years ago that after I was not employed by them anymore, but I kept in touch with them. They were a large company that acquired another company that was doing a lot of their infrastructure in the cloud, and they were subject to PCI, and this other company that they acquired had signed up for, I won't even name the provider, but it starts with A and ends with N, and there's a W in there sometimes. But they proclaim themselves to be PCI compliant as a service provider, and I think that company said, "Okay, great, we push everything out there, we're done." Where in the small print, and this company it's all there in writing if you look for it, says that our limitation on what we do for PCI is basically requirement 9, which is the physical security of the data center. They're covering all that for you. Everything else, it's still up to you. But that particular company that was acquired, they weren't doing all those other things. And of course, my old customer was realizing that, calling me up saying, "WTF, they're not doing all these things that they should have been doing. How'd they get away with this?" So I dug into all the T's and C's and the written documentation that goes along with this provider, and I'm like, well, yeah, they say right there that they don't do it. Why didn't they know that they didn't do it? So there's a little bit of, we'll sign you up, and once you're a customer, we've got you. But again, make sure you're reading the details of what they're providing, and if they're not providing it, is it a feature that's available that you need to pay extra for?
Yeah, I actually agree with that completely. The problem is that discussions around contracts and governance and policy are incredibly tedious and boring in the security industry, and people sort of gloss over them.
Yep.
But what I always tell people when they have discussions around cloud is it's all about the contract. I mean, you could be the most technical person in the world, but if you don't have a clue what's in your contract, you're incredibly at risk. You don't really know what's going on. And the legal profession has gotten better about this, I found. I mean, most of my clients have legal teams that are at least somewhat savvy about the contract language they need to be looking for, and largely it's been educated by the security and compliance communities in some ways. But if you're clueless and you just go in and go, well, they have on their website that they can be PCI compliant, that is, again, an education issue. It takes us right back to the beginning of this conversation.
Yep. So, originally there was a question in there, what's your view of the liability shift, perceived or actual, in terms of moving things to the cloud? How much do the providers generally pick up in terms of the responsibility for, security in general, various regulatory compliance requirements?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it varies, of course, but I mean, most of the major providers have compliant clouds that they offer, whether it's PCI or HIPAA or something else. What you have to look for is that shared responsibility model and the breakdown of that as it is stated in the contract. I give a great example in one of my classes, actually, that speaks to a Google Apps contract. And in fact, it's public record, so if anybody wants to search it, it's pretty funny. It's the city of Los Angeles who signed a contract with Google back, like 2009 or 10. And basically, there's a statement buried on page 114, and I'm not exaggerating, it's that far back, where Google says, hey, in the case of a security breach, it's really tough to sort of say who's to blame here. So if you guys lose a bunch of data in our cloud, we'll pay you $10,000. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it's actually $10,000. So imagine the entire city of Los Angeles police force or something losing all of their data, and Google's willing to give you $10,000 for that. And they say, oh, well, you can always sue us too, of course, but our army of lawyers would be willing to engage with you. I mean, it's ridiculous, but you got to know what you're getting into. And so I think it all does come down to the shared responsibility model, and most of them are pretty upfront about that, but it's your responsibility to read it.
Are they upfront about it before or after the ink is dry on the contract?
Oh, up front, at the beginning of the contract cycle. But those contracts are laborious. And if you're a company that's just desperate to get there and not willing to really get into the fine print of it, you're probably going to suffer for that.
Well, and I think, too, like you said, there's no communication between dev and security. How often is there conversation between security and the legal staff and the contracts people? Or are they also operating in an island, and their job is to go out and save money?
Yeah, more than before. Let's put it this way. There's more than before. I mean, if you talk to most big enterprises, those guys are hanging out. They're talking. But it's definitely not where it needs to be.
Dave, what's the most fun thing that you've built into the cloud security class or cloud class you're putting together so far?
Yeah, great question. And I am having a lot of fun because it's taking me back to my realization of what a crappy developer I am, which is fun in its own right, but it's all about automation, right? So I'm trying to sort of drag security kicking and screaming into the DevOps and sort of sec DevOps world, and get to the idea that you need to embed security at the beginning of the deployment cycle. And so we are using Ansible. We are building templates for configs with things like Chef and Puppet. We're going to be pushing that stuff out in a completely automated way. We're going to use completely scripted and templated data center builds. I mean, we're going to be pushing this stuff out into Amazon with nothing more than, essentially a template. And security needs to get their head around this. It may not be where you are exactly, but if you at least understand why the dev teams and the ops teams are into this and sort of moving in that direction, it's going to be huge. So the automation factor is what's really pushing me now.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Closing thoughts? Anyone?
Education, awareness, process, all that non-technical stuff.
I want to take Dave's class. I want to learn that. I want to learn more of that stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Read the finished project.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good recommendation.
I will second that because Gene Kim's awesome and that's a great book. But thanks for having me on, guys. It's been fun.
Thanks so much, Dave. Enjoy your dinner. We'll let you go so you can go have dinner.
Cheers.
Have a good one. We're going to take a short break and come right back. Stay tuned. Technical segment coming up.